Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, people of all nations, countries, creeds, everything else you want to think of, welcome to our weekly live here with Prepper Talk Radio. We are radio for the ready-minded, and today we are live streaming ready-mindedness from the cold, wintry north.
Definitely today, yeah.
It has been snowing where we live all day long. I've been out once to shovel already. I'll probably have to go out in an hour or two to shovel. We've already got about 8 inches at my house.
What?
Are you kidding me?
No, I live in Bountiful, Utah. We have the stupid snow with all the stupid lake effect from the Great Salt Lake, where it's like you want some moisture and precipitation.
The word bountiful should have been a warning to you then, Scott, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to move. I want to leave. I want to be gone from this place. It's got some benefits, but the snow is definitely not one of those because it's extra wet. Like it's heavier, wetter snow usually. And so it's like you're like shoveling 3 inches of snow, but it feels like 18 inches. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is heavy. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I had to winterize the RV and, take the batteries out of the motorcycles and the RV and, that kind of stuff.
No, I don't. I don't have any cool stuff like that.
Well, it's depressing. Sorry.
I had to winterize my lawnmower.
Well, you had to turn your sprinklers off, right? I mean, you did that.
I don't have to.
Yeah. You don't have sprinklers?
Right.
No, they turned the water off like a month and a half ago. So
you got city water. You got county.
I got county irrigation water.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So they turned it off for you.
Isn't it good to still do it though? Like I did. I still did switch the knob on mine. So
yeah,
and then
you've got irrigation water too in Spanish, right?
Yeah, I do. And then they told me to turn the knob, and then they said run the sprinkler system one last time to get all the water out. So.
Mm-hmm.
See, I don't have to do that because I actually have a open valve at the bottom of my sprinkler system that actually lets it all drain out after it goes.
You're on a hill, so it's all going to drain out down there.
Yep, that's where my valve is, in the back of the backyard.
That's perfect.
Right next to the cliff, if you will. we have a 12-foot drop off our backyard to our neighbor's backyard.
Oh wow!
So tell the kids don't play by the fence.
Yeah, for real.
So winter tip: if you haven't winterized your sprinkler system yet, go turn off the stop and waste valve, and that will release pressure and drain there at the valve. But if you've got to slope in your property, you need to open your valves, and hopefully you already have drains in your lines, and it'll drain out the lowest spot and keep your lines from freezing. So,
and if you don't have that, hook up your air compressor to it and blow it out,
or hire somebody to do it.
There you go. It's only like $30 to have somebody come blow that out. So
I think it's already past the time to do that now. So,
but if you haven't, have fun next year with all your new sprinkler projects.
Repair, yes.
Yep, you're gonna probably have to replace 2 to 12 heads and maybe replace a line or two, just depending.
One of those skills you need to learn anyway, because that can translate over to your plumbing in your house, or a lot of different things. Irrigation on your property, your homestead. So.
But don't let that make you think you can put sprinklers in your house all willy-nilly, because that could be bigger problems for later. So with that being said,
code violations in particular.
Well, and potential major flooding hazards, and let's have mold grow, guys. Let's just go crazy. I don't know. I think I'm excited for the day because with the snow, with the weather changes, like I've been thinking a lot about like my winter preps. Not just my winter preps, but like just on the daily, what I do, like my coats, I've got like super thick coats. I've got super light coats, but I don't have, because I ruined it last year, I don't have a good, just watershed coat, waterproof, like a Gore-Tex or something like that. I had a really cool Marmot, and I'm like, crap, I'm gonna have to go get a new one.
You ruined your Marmot jacket?
I left it somewhere accidentally, and the cat peed on it.
Oh no!
Where I left it, and it like won't I've washed it probably 15 times. I took it to a dry cleaner. That smell's not coming out.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
dang.
I will not be wearing that. And
well, if you want to go track some wildlife, throw that on. You'll be disguised with the scent.
They'll be like, oh, who's marking that territory? This is horrible. I'm going somewhere else.
It's like that Seinfeld episode where he just gives away his car.
Well, one of the things I had to learn coming from California, beautiful sunny California. I mean, the weather is amazing in California. The problem is the politics and the being run by who. Anyways, one of the first things I had to do was get new gear. Like it was funny. I went to the Big Five. I went to the Big Five to get some snow shoes, like some boots. There's some walking boots, not like ski boots or anything fancy. Like basically, if I wanted to go sledding or something, I just wanted some good, strong shoes. And it was funny because I got there and it was a little bit later than normal. I didn't realize that there's a certain time frame to buy this clothing, and if you don't buy it within that 2 or 3 week time frame, you're basically they're either sold out or they don't have it. They haven't even started selling it. And so this year I was smart and went and got some stuff. But last year it was funny because I was at the Big Five and I was like, "Hey, do you have any snow boots in this size?" And whatever. They're like, "Well, what we have is what we have." And then she's like, "It's because all these darn California people came here and bought everything up, and we don't have anything left." I'm like, I'm one of those darn California people that needed us to have some snow boots, and thankfully they had something in my size. But this year we went to Costco and to Big Five ahead of time. In fact, when we went, the guy was like, "We don't even have stuff out at Big Five," and so I was able to get something for my daughter, anyways, that they had from last year's inventory. But Costco had some stuff already laid out, and I didn't want to miss it this year, so I already got I got coats and layers and shoes and pants and just everything I could think of. I probably missed a few things.
It makes a bit of a difference, doesn't it, to actually have the right gear in the right climate.
Oh yeah.
What I loved about that jacket was that I could put it over every other jacket, or I could just not have a jacket on at all and wear that, and it would keep me dry.
Layers.
And it was well ventilated. Awesome. And because I get way too my body does not regulate well. It's just like, oh, you're moving. Turn on the thermal heater, start sweating. Like I'm like, I thought about working and it goes nuts. Like I'll think about, tomorrow I've got to make sure I dig a trench 5 feet. I start perspiring, like thinking about that. And my body heats up and it's like, oh, we're getting ready for work. And I'm like, no, that's in 14 hours. Calm down. And it's like, so I have to be quick to regulate my layers when I am working, when I am out in the cold. Because I get so hot so fast.
So what are the first 3 rules of winter, of whether you're hiking or just outdoors, and particularly hiking and mountaineering, whatever? What are the first 3 rules? Remember?
I don't know what you're going to say. But number 1 is don't sweat.
Stay dry. So yeah,
don't
sweat. Stay dry. Number 2, stay dry.
Number 3, stay dry.
Stay dry. So imagine this: these mountaineers who climb Everest and these big peaks, where it's can get to 60 below. Now imagine sweating and having that perspiration next to your body and being in 60 below. It is extremely dangerous. I've never been in that situation before, but I have been in similar, maybe -20 or so, with the wind blowing. And then perspiring, and then being exposed to that. Man, it was horrible. Fortunately, I had a stove. I was able to cook some food, get in a little sleeping bag I had. And I'm telling you, man, stay dry, stay dry, stay dry. Have the right gear when you're hiking, when you're perspiring, so you can ventilate your sweat, so you don't have the chance of freezing. Because if you're dry and it's cold, that's one thing. But if you're wet and cold, that's a life-threatening situation. And I definitely felt life-threatening to me because that was my first experience with that kind of cold and being wet from perspiration. So absolutely right, Scott.
So when I was in Boy Scouts, we did Klondike campouts. Have you guys done one of those? It's a winter campout where there's snow. I don't know if you've experienced that at all, Paris, being from California. There's not a whole lot.
We did have a Klondike it's nothing like what's here, I'm sure, but we did have a Camp Chwanakee in near Fresno, California, up in by Yosemite had some snow. So I did it one year with the Scouts.
So I thought you were going to refer to the Klondike bar.
Oh, well, that's what would you do? So we went camping and we did this every year. We'd go on our winter camp out, and they do it here too. And it's funny because like you go and it's like 18 degrees. Well, one year it was -20 degrees in Colorado.
Oh my gosh.
And it was cold. You don't have stoves. You're in a little tiny tent. Well, my dad, being the genius he is, having grown up in Idaho, being first generation that wasn't raised on the farm, wasn't never had to live in a dugout cabin. He was taught all the things to keep us warm. So before we left, he's like, "Oh, it's going to be really cold tonight, but we're going to go." And I'm like, "Okay." I was a dumb kid. I didn't know yet what I was in for. But he took double sleeping bags and he took newspaper. I'm like, "What are you doing with newspaper?" And he used newspaper and a roll of tinfoil. And guess what he did with the tinfoil?
Made a hat.
Was that
No, we did not make a hat.
Insulation for the ground? You didn't have sleeping pads?
We didn't have nobody had sleeping pads back then.
Yeah.
Right?
A big chunk of foam is probably best what you had, right?
So what we had is he rolled out the tinfoil on the floor. Then he took all those newspapers and put them out. Thankfully, I was 13 and I was doing newspaper routes. And so I had all the extra newspapers. He's like, don't throw those out. Don't recycle those. Whatever's left over, just hold on to for the next few weeks because we got the camp out coming up. I'm like, okay. Well, we just used those and we slept on those. I slept like a baby and it was freezing cold and I didn't even know. Wow. I was so toasty warm in that tent. He created a thermal layer between us and the snow. Mm-hmm. And then he created a thermal layer with the tinfoil above us to bounce our radiant heat back. Now you can get all the little Mylar blankets and stuff like that don't do a whole lot, but sometimes just that little bit is enough. Transition to another time. When we did the Ready Man laser tag event, well, not laser tag, it was what was it called? Shock vest. Mm-hmm.
You're referring to the time when the photographer's camera infrared kept setting off your shock belt.
Oh, right? That's right.
Remember that?
Well, I'd forgotten about that. I'm like, why is this going off all the time? But we go up into the mountain up above Bountiful, and it wasn't a cold night. I mean, not unnormally cold, but it was in the 50s. And I intentionally brought just my little tiny get home bag. Shane and I both, they're like, we want to do this preppers versus kind of a survivalist group that is up there that is trained militia group, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
And by the way, we kicked butt.
And we totally throttled them. And I slept in a Mylar bivy bag. And it was too hot because it was a bivy bag. It was holding all my heat. And the moisture, more importantly, was the problem. It was not letting the moisture out. Mm-hmm. And so I noticed after a while, I was like, my back is sweating. Oh, crap. And it's like 1 a.m. Like, it's only going to get colder. I'm like, no. So I had to unlayer. But guess what? It was enough. And so understanding what the elements do, understanding what you have access to is going to make a huge difference in any type of survival situation during the winter. But it's like, get practicing those things now so you don't have to practice it in the worst weather.
Absolutely.
And like you say, Scott, there are the high-tech methods, especially nowadays. We have pretty much every gear we can possibly imagine that I didn't have as a kid. I'd go out in the winter with my dad deer hunting and we'd sleep in the snow and it was absolutely miserable. And I remember those nights very well, unfortunately. But and that's probably one of the reasons why now I'm just an absolute gearhead. I have the sleeping pads and the sleeping bags, and I avoid winter camping like the plague. I just, unless it's in my RV, I'll go do that. And I've done that the last year or so out of the property. But, I got the propane heater and all that. It's still pretty miserable when it gets down into single digits. Anyway, the gear in particular, like you say, the number one item is to protect yourself from the ground. Right. You're either if your body's on the ground, you're trying to heat up that ground and the ground is trying to freeze you out. The ground's going to win, right? You don't have enough calories in your body to warm that rock up you're sleeping on or the ground or whatever. So you've got to have that insulation in between.
And that's true for any time of year. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Thermal mass is thermal mass, guys. It's going to win. That's why the number one killer in the wild is not bears. It is not cougars. It's not cows. It's not rattlesnakes. You know what it is?
Hypothermia,
exposure. Mm-hmm. And it's in summer and it's in winter because you can get heat exhaustion, heat stroke and die. You can get hypothermia and die. Like if you can't regulate your heat, you're going to die. That's why shelter is the number one rule in the rule of survival. Like, you can really get to the minutiae and be like, well, the number one rule is keep breathing, right?
Is air, right?
Is air, but then it goes shelter, and shelter is a shelter. It's fire. It's a heat source. It's layers of clothing. Like, there's so many things you can categorize and put in that area. And so that's why I kind of wanted to talk about today is like all the different things you can use to help you during the winter. Like, get creative, have fun with it. Like, throw some Mylar sleeping bags in the back of your car, and some wool ones, some wool blankets. Throw, like, I have, I don't know. I have those little traction cleats in my truck. Well,
one of the speaking of wool blankets, one of the guys that's watching right now, Trey Ezel. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly.
Ezel. Yeah, I had a good friend last name Ezel.
He
Arizona.
He said that he 17 degrees, 7,300 feet in Montana, and he said that with a wool blanket and a fleece lined sleeping bag, he was fine. And so one of the things that not a lot of people know is that wool is one of those few materials that is actually continues to keep its warmth even when it's wet. It's the same as when it's dry. It is obviously better to keep it dry, but if you have to have something that's wet, you want to have wool. And so if you're going to go someplace, especially if you know what you're doing and planning ahead of time, have wool socks, have wool mittens, have some wool materials, especially a wool blanket. I have a wool blanket in every one of my cars, and all of my go bags have, well, not all my go bags, because a wool blanket is very bulky and heavy. But I have it in all my cars for sure, because that's something that's super important.
And there are a lot of synthetics out there as well that do just about as good as wool, that are lighter, right? It's down that you don't want to get wet, because it has zero insulating properties once it's wet. But down provides for a lot of airspace, and that's where you get a lot of insulation as well, is with airspace. So you don't have to have a thick sleeping bag, but if you've got layers, like you've got a 20-degree bag, but you've got a nice wool blanket inside of it, you can be comfortable down into the down to the 0 degrees. And also on that same topic is when you're purchasing a sleeping bag, if it says, oh, this is a 20-degree bag, you've got to get into the details, looking at it, saying, okay, is this a 20-degree comfort bag, or is this a 20-degree survival bag? At 20 degrees, you're just going to survive, you'll be freezing your butt off, but it's still called a 20-degree bag. Whereas some are saying, oh, this is a 20-degree bag, but it's a comfort rated, so you can actually sleep comfortably at 20 degrees. Otherwise, you need to add blankets on top, or whatever, a lot of different other layers and such. But
don't be deceived by marketing on those sleeping bags, please.
Exactly.
Make sure you do. Especially if they're 20 or 30 bucks, it's not going to be
exactly.
Don't buy your survival stuff at Walmart. Like, more importantly,
exactly. And sorry, Paris, don't buy your survival stuff at Big Five either.
Well, I mean, the shoes. Hey, I went. So this is the story about the shoes. I knew what you're saying. So I went to Sportsman's Warehouse, which is a much higher quality typically.
Yeah.
And I bought my boots at Sportsman's Warehouse. They broke within a week. Like I was lacing them up, and the thing pops off and breaks. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go to Big Five and give them a shot. And those boots lasted. I don't know what it is, but like certain things you can get fortunate with, and it's going to be fine.
Yeah, and there are some things that are, for me, are very important, and shoes, boots, especially for winter, that's one of them. And gloves, boots, and then your shell, what'll keep you dry. You can't, of course, the fabric to avoid in winter and water is cotton. Anything that that is going to absorb water and not wick it away from your body, you want to avoid, especially jeans. I see people in the winter in jeans all the time. The absolute worst. However, if you stay dry, they're perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's funny because, like, I as a delivery driver, right, running around in sneakers isn't going to cut it all winter long. So I started testing out my hiking boots. They're completely waterproof, and I'm like so glad I didn't have to work today in this slushy wet stuff. Because I'm like, I really don't want to deal with that today.
Yeah, it would have been miserable.
But it's like, those shoes are heavier. And I've noticed my legs were exhausted yesterday.
Dang.
Because of the drastic difference in those. But guess what? My feet were so grateful that I wore those, they actually did better in the boots than they have in my sneakers the last few weeks.
Wow.
I think because my sneakers are starting to break down. I mean, I'm pulling 40 miles a week on the sneakers. Don't know how long those are going to last at this point.
Well, it's just your feet are going to get tougher, right? Your feet are going to, your legs and your feet are going to handle it better.
Get the gear that makes sense for you. Get the gear that works best. Like I've got the cleats for my feet too, that I can slip onto any type of shoe. They give me instant snow traction, right? Ice traction. Having the right gloves. You know, we live in this technological age. You can buy gloves that have these fancy heaters that you have to recharge and stuff. And I'm like, that's fine. But if you don't have the heat working, they're not warm enough.
No, they're
without
exactly.
And that's where they cut corners and save money on it. So make sure you're buying good gloves or good mittens or a layered glove system.
Mm-hmm.
Like my favorite set of gloves that I've got are actually a glove mitten set from Burton. And I've got these little tiny gloves inside these great big mittens. And it's just like, if I need to use my phone or anything, I pull the big mitten off. That's waterproof. It's an amazing shell, but it's also insulated. And I've got the little technology thumb and finger points on my phone. I can work with it through my gloves, and then I put my gloves back on and I go on my way.
Yeah. And I think the key to that, is obviously layers are the key.
Yes.
But for me, having that base layer, having a thin base layer, which fits tight to the body, which wicks water, moisture away. But also for my gloves, I have a thin pair of polypropylene or other synthetic that are tight fitting as well, like you say, Scott. And then I have my mitts or gloves over the top of that, of course, depending on how cold it is. But layers for gloves as well. But also be careful that it's not restricting your blood flow, because if you have tight pair of socks and tight boots, your feet are going to be freezing. And same with gloves. If you have tight gloves and you're not getting good blood flow, your hands will be freezing. You've got to have that be able to move around, and that's where mittens are fantastic, right? But they're just not as ambidextrous as gloves. But in general, hands are going to stay warmer. And that's why I like a thin polypropylene and then a mitt. A nice warm mitt over the top of that that you can take off and not freeze your hand because you still have a thin layer on, then glove it back up, right? And not struggle to warm your hands back up in the extreme cold. So
it's the worst. Like when you're cold and your hands or your feet are just uncontrollably cold and you can't do anything to warm them up. Like that's the worst, because psychologically you're getting destroyed.
Yeah.
Like when your whole body's cold, you're goodbye, right? But when your hands and feet won't warm up, that's terrible. Like I remember so many times we'd go camping and there'd be a kid who got his hands wet and it was cold. And I'm like, oh no. And we'd all have to sit around him and keep him close to the fire and, help him get his hands warm or his feet warm, and then also dry out his socks or his gloves. And then he wouldn't be able to wear his gloves or socks the next day. And we're like, did you bring an extra pair? Well, that is my extra pair. Well, where's your primary pair?
I already got those wet.
Those are wet too. Well, where are they? Let's be drying those out as well. Like
they're outside in the snow, frozen, solid.
Yeah, I left them in my boots. Your boots are now swamped, like frozen. Like, what are you doing? Like,
it is really critical, to stay dry.
Stay dry.
Yeah.
I think that, not to talk about one particular product in the podcast, but we know we're affiliates for Fortress Clothing, and they have a fantastic line of clothing that I've heard of. And the guy, what was their test that they did on this thing? They threw a guy in an ice lake, pulled him out, and the clothing kept the guy warm and to prove that their clothing really works.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic. I think we'll have a link in the description below if you want to get some Fortress clothing. Unfortunately, it's wintertime, so the discount we can get is not as good as what it is during the summertime. So if you didn't get it during the summertime, it's not going to be.
Still use the promo code PrepperTalk, because it will link it back to us and it'll help support the show.
Yeah, please do. But it's worth it to get that kind of good quality. That's the thing that, Shane and Scott and I have shared with you, that, if you're going to spend some money, spend the value. Don't worry about if to me, something is expensive is if you put a lot of money into it and it doesn't give you any value. But if you're putting a lot of money into it and it's got the value and it lasts, that's not expensive. That's a good buy. That's a good deal, because you're getting good value. And quality clothing for winter time is not something you want to scrimp and save on. And so, I mean, Utah Mike says right here, he's been on the show several times. We shared his good show is very important. At 55, you'll pay for bad shoes. You don't want to pay for bad shoes. You'll either pay for good ones or you'll pay for bad ones, but pay for the good ones.
Your body will pay, right?
Yeah,
Your mind
exactly.
will pay. You will suffer for bad shoes. You'll suffer for bad gloves. You'll suffer for bad gear. And this goes like across all seasons, all times, all scenarios. Like the better your gear, the better you'll be. Like I always have leather gloves. My most recent pair of leather gloves actually was a gift from my really good friend, Shane. You remember buying those for me? We were somewhere and we were in your car and you're like, I was like, oh man, I didn't bring my normal gloves. And you bought me a pair of yellow gloves. And I was like, oh, thank you. Nice. And I love them. And they were a little tight to start, but now they're flex fit to my fingers. They're like the most comfortable gloves I have are my leather gloves.
There's definitely something to be said about leather. Yeah.
Yeah. On my mission, when I served my mission, I had a good, strong pair of leather gloves. And guess what? When we had tornado cleanup for 3 weeks, I was the only one with a good set of gloves. Everyone else is ripping through their little garden crap gloves because that's all you could find at the time. Everything else was sold out like that fast.
Yeah. Well, the beauty of leather gloves too is, obviously you're in the winter, if you're outdoors and you're camping, you're going to be making a fire as well, right? Mm-hmm. Leather gloves will give you some protection from the heat as well without getting ruined. Whereas if you have something synthetic, it's going to melt and it's going to burn you. It's going to be, and
then it's going to rip off layers of skin.
It's going to be terrible. So synthetics are great. I love synthetics, but if you're going to be around fire, man, leather is the right way to go. I found a pair of leather gloves online. I think I'm going to order, but they were crazy expensive, like $140.
And you don't even have to have you don't even have to go crazy with the leather gloves either. Like I found even most of the pairs of gloves I have that are leather are between $20 and $50.
Right, for work gloves, right?
For work gloves, and they're great. There's the winter leather ones that I've got.
Exactly what I'm referring to. Yeah,
I spend about $65 on
an insulated pair,
but they're probably now with the economy, they're probably $180 now. But I've still got those, and they're some of my best gloves. Like, they're easier to maintain. If you buy something of quality, it's easier to maintain, and that's part of it. Like for winter, you already brought up winterizing the motorcycle and all the other stuff, like winterizing the lawnmower, winterizing the stuff. Like, take care of things so that the weather doesn't destroy it. Take care of your car. What do you do to keep your car running better and safer during the winter?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Make sure you do anything. Swap out your windshield wipers.
Yeah, swap out your windshield wipers. You can there's carpet drapes you can throw over the front to keep the ice from forming on your windshield, right? My aunt she has a wool blanket in her car all the time, but she also has a big blanket that it's a quilt that she throws on the front of her car all winter long, every night. I'm like, I thought it was so weird when I was a kid.
Tuck it in.
And she covers the front windows, the front windshield, and the whole front of the car. And I'm like, what are you doing? And then every morning, if it snows, she just pulls the whole thing off and the car's clean. I'm like, oh, brilliant. And it's like those little types of things, it doesn't take much. And she got that at a Goodwill type store for next to nothing. You can get creative and do things that are actually going to preserve the things you have and make harsh weather easier to survive.
Yeah, and just makes life more enjoyable, and instead of having to go out and scrape those windows and just complaining how cold it is, and you don't even have gloves and you're scraping, you have your bare hands
and your credit card,
make life more enjoyable, and do it right,
Yeah, get the right tool for the right thing.
It makes all the difference, and certain people, I like winter, I'm getting older and it's a little less appealing to me than it used to be, but just doing those little things like that make it so much more enjoyable, to live in this harsher climate, winter climate.
I used to love winter, but living in Bountiful's changed that for me.
Right, you got time to get out of there. You got the opportunity, so
it's time to move to less snow. I love snow. I love playing in the snow. I don't like working in the snow.
Yeah. That's a whole nother animal. We could talk about 30 minutes on that too.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy. I sent my daughter to school the other day, and And she's like, Dad, it might be cold right now, but it'll be warmer later. Well, that's the problem with Utah weather, it's kind of bipolar a little bit. So that's the importance of having layers as well, is that sometimes if you're trekking along in a hike, let's say you dressed to, with all your layers and you're hiking along on a hike, and you're just realizing that that's too many layers now that your body's cranking out some thermodynamics. And so now you can change it. You can take off those layers. And my little girl, she came home and she says, Dad, I took off my, I think we sent her to school with like 3 shirts and a sweatshirt and a jacket, you know what I mean? And so when she came home from school, she's like, Dad, I took off all the extra shirts and just put on my regular shirt and went out and played. And so, because that was the way she needed to do it. And so layers is good to keep you warm, but it's also layers to take off as you get warm doing other things or just interacting, and then you can stay warm and and that's again, not getting to the point where you're sweating, where you're not wet any longer, and you can actually move forward and have a good day. So
if you live in the Rockies, everyone that lives in the Rockies knows, like I've been a Rockies kid my whole life, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado, a little time in Wyoming. If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. It will change. And it does. Like it is bipolar. Yes. But knowing too, also the layers issue, where are you going to put those clothes that you have to delayer? That's why I always tell everybody, have spare room in your bag. Because if you have to unlayer and put it somewhere, oftentimes if you put it down, you lose it and forget about it.
And even if it's summer, I have a pack with a jacket in it, right? I saw plenty of kids walking home from school today in their T-shirts while it's snowing. Yeah, it's a short walk, but how hard is it? They've got a backpack on already, have a jacket in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny because it's like, I remember going to school in the snow in shorts and a T-shirt, and I'd get yelled at, "Where's your coat? Where's this?" I'm like, I was hot. I'm like, I don't want to get wet and sweat, so I'm not going to wear a coat. Well, where's your coat? It's in my backpack. Why isn't it on? I'm like, because it's too hot. What? If you know you and you know how your body works, like, take care of it. Like, do what makes sense for you. Like,
exactly.
It's so funny. Like, I see kids now and they're like, they'll wear shorts, but then they've got like the biggest, thickest coat on. And I'm like, what are you doing? And they've got these little shorts on and they're running around in the winter. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, I guess I was that way when I was a kid too, I guess. But
yeah, I was teasing one of my neighbors yesterday. She had a big old winter coat and flip-flops on on her feet. And I was like, what a difference, it's just all in one outfit. It was just funny.
Well, Jennifer Johnson just posted. She's like, I've got shoes, coat, clothes in my truck pretty much all year. That's so wise. Like, I've always got an extra pair of shoes, another couple of layers in my car all the time. That's part of my gear. Like, and Shane used to always tease me because of my footwear. He's like, "What are you wearing? Like, why are you wearing flip-flops? What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "It's summer." And I'm like, I like to be barefoot as much as possible. I want to toughen up my feet like Cody Lundeen. I want to have kick A mitochondria. Like, that's how I want it to be. And I'm not there yet, but like, I always have a stronger pair of shoes in the car, like my boots. Like, I had my Keens in the car all the time back then. Now I'm like, I've got different shoes, but those were the boots that I carried with me all the time. Those are the same boots that I've taken through Death Valley and the next day summited Mount Whitney in California. Like, know what works, keep what works, have the layers of protection, have the layers of defense, always have something you can start a fire with. I don't think we can say that enough. Always have something you can start a fire with, whether it's a ferro rod, whether it's a flint and steel, whether it's a stick that you know how to rub just right to light fire, right? Like, if you're good with a bow drill, but like, really simply, guys, just get some good lighters. You even just get the redundancy of like 5 Bics. Throw one in every vehicle. Have a couple at home. Put one in your backpack. Like, put one in your purse. You may smoke, you may not smoke. I don't care. I prefer you don't, because you'll have a longer quality and higher quality of life. But like, have a lighter, because you never know when you're going to need it. And know what's combustible and what's safe to burn and what's not safe to burn. Because you never know when you're going to need that heat. I grew up with a kid who, when he was 7 fell through the ice and stopped breathing and went brain dead. And he was in scouts with me. So I was Scott S, he was Scott B. And he was just one of the nicest kids, but he for a little time, they said he was dead because he fell through the ice and they couldn't get him warmed up fast enough.
Wow.
Thankfully, somebody else was there that had gear to warm him up while they waited for EMTs. And they were able to revive him. They were able to get him alive and take care of him. And the thing is like, you never know what's going to happen any day. They didn't think he was going to fall through the ice. They thought the ice was plenty thick enough. And they were fishing. Guess what? It wasn't. So whatever you're doing, whatever adventure you're on, whatever, if it's just driving to work and back, have the gear handy to protect your family, to protect yourself, to be able to bounce back from whatever's happening in your life, because you don't want to lose that game when that game hits.
Amen.
And I think with that, like, I love doing the show. I love working with you guys because we're trying to bring common sense to the masses, guys. Like, those of you guys that are listening to this right now, like, please, whatever you can do to help us grow this and show this to others, like, share our pages, share our podcast. If you appreciate what we're doing, make sure you're liking and subscribing. Turn on the notifications. Send us your questions. Let us know where you're stuck, what you need help on. Let us know what we did good. And let us know if there's stuff that we're wrong. If you find us saying something that's wrong, correct us. We're tough enough that we can take that critical thinking and we'll bounce right back because we're like, oh, that's even better to know. Like, I thought I knew some stuff, and I talked to Dale, Fortress Clothing. He's like, oh, actually, it's this. I'm all, perfect. You know this better than I do, and I know that because I've seen what you've done. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to trust you on it. And so I go check it. He's right. So please share our stuff, help us grow, help us get more people going, help us help your neighbors, help us help your families, help us help your friends, help us help the strangers who need this. How we support the channel is by getting it growing, getting people involved, getting people helped. And please, 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 whatever you do, every day, just take a little extra time to think about what you can do to be better prepared. If you don't know what the weather's going to be like, take a couple extra layers. Make sure one of them is going to keep you dry. And then if it gets too hot, you can always strip down until it becomes too illegal. Like, there's a point where you need to stop, even if you're sweating. I lived in Arizona. I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. That's why I don't live in Arizona anymore, because my word, it was miserable for me down there. Too hot.
Yeah. And I think there's too many people that bump that line of illegal on not wearing enough. Please put on some clothes, people.
When I lived in Florida too, it was the same thing. I'm like, shouldn't you be wearing something, sir? Huh? I'm at home. We're good. Well, no, but you have company now, so shouldn't you be wearing something? It's the world's a funny place. But always be prepared. Always stay ready. Appreciate you guys. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, everyone, for joining in our live tonight. We appreciate you. Stay ready-minded. Stay, as the military friends always say, stay frosty. Well, it is cold and snowy, so stay frosty, but warm. And with that, we will end our show for the night. Thank you for participating. Thanks for being there. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have liked and subscribed, or even if you haven't, hurry and do it, because we're doing a drawing right now. We're going to use randomizer. We're going to randomly pick someone to win a $250 Jase case. It's your medical supplies, the antibiotics that you need to have on hand. And with that, we're also giving away, what are we giving away, Shane? 5 ounces of
5-ounce silver bar.
Beautiful silver. Real money. Real money. Wealth. Guys, make sure you're following us. Make sure you're subscribed to YouTube. That's where we're going to pick the winner from. And make sure you're in our Facebook group, Emergency Prep and Self-Reliance. Until next time, keep streaming our podcast because it'll help you get better prepared. Stay ready. Be ready. live ready, and share the ready lifestyle. Have a good night.
Take care, guys.
See ya.